Nyasha was about to make the promise of her life, but in a world where secrets fester, what happens when the lies we hide are forced into the light?
In the quiet village of Rokea, where tradition ruled over every aspect of life, nothing was more sacred than the purity vow that young women were expected to take before marriage. For generations, this vow was the ultimate symbol of honour, a guarantee that a woman was untouched, her virginity intact, her future husband assured of her loyalty. Every year, the village would gather for the ceremony where young women dressed in white would pledge their chastity before the village elders and their families. It was a promise that could never be broken. Until one fateful night, it was. What if everything you thought was pure was a lie? The villagers gathered in the square, torches flickering in the evening breeze. The air was thick with anticipation as two lovers, Nyasha and Kofi, stood at the heart of the crowd. Their wedding was only days away, and tonight would be the night Nyasha took her purity vow. Kofi, tall and strong, stood with pride, knowing that his bride would soon confirm her devotion to him in front of everyone. Nyasha, beautiful and composed, dressed in the traditional white gown, smiled softly, though a flicker of fear lingered behind her eyes. She had a secret that, if revealed, would tear everything apart. As the elder raised his hands to quiet the crowd, the ceremony began. One by one, the women stepped forward to make their vows, each promising their purity and their loyalty to their future husbands. The crowd watched with pride, knowing these vows would ensure a stable future for the village. But when it was Nyasha's turn, the air seemed to shift. Nyasha stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared to speak. She opened her mouth to repeat the sacred words, when suddenly, Kofi interrupted. "Before you speak, Nyasha, I have something to say." Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was unheard of. No man had ever interrupted the vow. Kofi's face was twisted with anger, his once proud demeanour now clouded by rage. "Nyasha has a secret," he spat, his voice rising with each word. "She isn't the woman you all think she is." Nyasha froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this moment was coming, but she wasn't prepared for the devastation it would cause. Kofi turned to the crowd, his eyes burning with betrayal. "I know the truth," he continued. "She gave herself to another man long before she promised herself to me. And worse. It wasn't by choice." The crowd erupted in murmurs, whispers of disbelief spreading like wildfire. Nyasha's hands shook as tears welled in her eyes. She had been violated, taken against her will by a man who had left the village long ago. She had never told anyone, not even Kofi, because in this village it didn't matter if it was her choice or not. Her virginity was gone, and with it, her worth in the eyes of the village. "You lied to me!" Kofi shouted, stepping closer to Nyasha. "You lied to everyone! You were supposed to be mine, pure, untouched!" Nyasha's voice cracked as she finally spoke. "It wasn't my choice," she whispered, barely audible over the growing tension. "I didn't want this, Kofi. I didn't choose this." But it didn't matter. In the eyes of the village, her purity was gone, and no amount of pleading would change that. The elders, who were supposed to uphold justice and compassion, stood in silence, their faces hard with judgment. "She has broken the vow," one elder finally said, his voice cold and final. "She cannot marry. She is no longer worthy." The words hit Nyasha like a physical blow. She collapsed to her knees, her white gown pooling around her like a fallen angel's wings. The crowd looked on, some in pity, others in disgust, but there was no one who stood up for her. Not even Kofi, the man who once claimed to love her. As the whispers grew louder, another young woman in the crowd stepped forward. Her name was Amina, and she too had a secret. She too had been violated, her virginity stolen in the dark of night by a man who would never face consequences. She looked at Nyasha, and for the first time, someone saw her not as broken, but as brave. "Nyasha is not alone," Amina said, her voice shaking but strong. "I too have lost what this village deems most important. But it wasn't by choice, and we will not be shamed for something that wasn't our fault." The crowd fell silent. Amina's words hung in the air like a challenge to the very fabric of their society. "How many more of us will live in silence, ashamed of something that was done to us?" she continued, stepping closer to Nyasha. "How many more women will be cast aside for something they couldn't control?" The elders looked uneasy, shifting where they stood, but they said nothing. For the first time, the power of the village's traditions was being questioned, and no one knew how to respond. One by one, other women in the crowd began to speak up, some sharing their own stories, others simply standing in solidarity. Nyasha, once alone and broken, now found herself surrounded by the women of her village, each one standing as a testament to the resilience that lived within them. But Kofi couldn't stand it. His pride, his sense of ownership over Nyasha was too strong. "You are all liars," he screamed. "You've ruined everything." In a fit of rage, he stormed out of the square, leaving Nyasha kneeling in the centre, surrounded by the women who had found their voices. The village elders, seeing the strength in their unity, had no choice but to reconsider. "This vow," one elder finally said, his voice softer now, "must mean more than just a promise of purity. It must be about the truth, the honesty, and the respect we owe to one another." The crowd stood in stunned silence as the old ways began to crumble before their eyes. Nyasha and Amina, though scarred, had ignited a fire within the village that could never be extinguished. As the night ended, Nyasha rose to her feet, her white gown stained and torn, but her spirit unbroken. The village of Rokea would never be the same again. The vow that had once defined a woman's worth was shattered, but in its place, something stronger began to grow. Solidarity, truth, and the courage to stand up for what is right. The vow was broken, but in its wake, the truth was set free. Thank you for joining Jum's journey and experiencing the power of acceptance and resilience with us. If you found her story inspiring, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for more captivating tales ahead. Until next time, farewell.